Hello and welcome. On behalf of the Association of Professional Chaplains, I thank you for joining us today for our APC webinar, Self-Care is Essential, Refueling Your Energy for Ministry. I am pleased to introduce our presenter, Roberta Sansere-White. Roberta Sansere-White is a staff chaplain at Fetus Healthcare and Sibley Memorial Hospital, Johns Hopkins Medicine in Washington, D.C. She completed her chaplaincy internship at Sibley Memorial Hospital, Johns Hopkins Medicine during the summer of 2011. Upon completing her Master of Divinity degree in 2012, she trained as a resident chaplain at MedStar Georgetown University Hospital in Washington, D.C. From resident chaplain, she went on to join the staff at Sibley Memorial Hospital, Johns Hopkins Medicine in 2013. 2 years later, she also joined the team at Fetus Healthcare, a hospice agency. A brief question and answer session will follow the presentation, and you may type your question into the Q&A area at the bottom of your screen at any time. Thank you for your attention. I would now like to turn the call over to our presenter, Ms. Roberta Sansere-White.
Hello. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Association of Professional Chaplains Airline, also referred to as APC Flight 2018, bound for Atlanta, Georgia, with continued service to Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. All carry-on items should now be stored securely, either in an overhead bin or under the seat in front of you. All aisles, exits, and bulkhead areas should now be clear. All electronic devices should be turned off and stowed, as they may interfere with the aircraft's navigational and communication systems. Once airborne, we'll let you know when you may use approved electronic devices, but note that some items may not be used at any time during the flight. You'll find a list of approved devices in the in-flight information section of Sky Magazine. If you're seated in an emergency exit, please review the responsibilities for the emergency exit seating on the back of the safety information card located in the seat pocket in front of you. If you are unable or prefer not to perform these functions, please let us know, and we'll be happy to find you another seat. As we leave the gate, make sure your seatbelt is fastened. To fasten, insert the metal tip into the buckle and adjust the strap so it's low and tight across your lap. To release the belt, lift the top of the buckle. Remain seated with your seatbelt securely fastened anytime the seatbelt sign is on. Even if the sign is off, we ask that you keep your seatbelt fastened while seated in case we experience some unexpected turbulence. For everyone's safety, federal regulations require all passengers to comply with the posted play cards and lighted signs located throughout the cabin, as well as any crew member instructions. Smoking is not allowed on any APC flight, and federal law prohibits tampering with, disabling, or destroying a restroom smoke detector. There are 12 exits on our Boeing 747-400, 12 doors, 5 on each side of the main deck, and 1 door on each side of the upper deck. 8 of the doors on the main deck have detachable slides that can be used as rafts. The doors on the upper deck and those above the wings have slides that may be used in land evacuation only. All exits are clearly marked with an exit sign. However, if we experience a loss of power resulting in cabin visibility being reduced, white lights illuminating the aisle will guide you to red lights marking each of the exits. Please take a moment to find the exits closest to you, keeping in mind that your closest exit may be behind you. If there is a drop in cabin pressure, panels above your seat will open, revealing oxygen mask. If this happens, pull a mask toward you until the tube is fully extended. Place the mask over your nose and mouth. Slip the plastic strap over your head and adjust the mask if necessary. Breathe normally and note that oxygen is flowing even if the bag doesn't inflate. Be sure to adjust your own mask before helping others. Good morning to some good afternoon to others. Welcome to today's presentation, Self-Care is Essential, Refueling Your Energy for Ministry. Again, I'm Roberta White, and I would like to go to our first slide, which talks about the introduction of this presentation. Over the years, there has been an increased focus on the attention given to the self-care of clergy. Pastors, chaplains, pastoral counselors, spiritual advisors, and so on. Self-care remains a topic of discussion for clergy because far too many of us are effective at helping the people and communities we serve implement self-care strategies while we wrestle with trying to understand how self-care should look in our own lives. The purpose of this webinar is to help us garner a better understanding of what self-care is and is not, how some religious traditions view self-care, and ways to implement self-care. Throughout the presentation, questions are welcomed. As a community of servants, we will strive to arrive at answers or generate additional questions that will help us fine-tune what effective self-care should look like and feel like. At this point, I would like to invite everyone to join me in a word of prayer before we go deep into our presentation. Dear God, lift me up for your blessings today. I pray that you will anoint me with strength and self-care. I pray that you will grace me with patience and wisdom. I pray that you will encourage me throughout the day to take the corrective steps to walk proudly and behave well. Amen. So we're going to go ahead and go on in our presentation, but I'd like to go back to how I started out the presentation. One of the reasons why I use the stewardess directions when you go on an airline flight, if any of you have flown, and many chaplains and clergy and people joining us today have had the opportunity to take a flight, you're always given the same advice, being warned about cabin pressure, lights, exits. But something that stood out to me some years ago is the directions that they give about the oxygen mask. And they always tell you to secure your own mask before helping someone else with their mask. And to me, that's a good direction for self-care. I'm a firm believer that we cannot care for anyone else unless we're effectively caring for ourselves. Even though many of us have been great at helping other people care for themselves, that was surely that was grace. Because if we're not administering self-care for ourselves, but we're helping other people be effective, it's time for us to turn into ourselves and look at how we can better take care of ourselves. So with that being said, we're going to go on to the next slide. Oh, excuse me, I skipped ahead too far. So I would like for us to explore our understanding of two key concepts. You're not going to see this slide, but the two key concepts are ministry and self-care. First of all, I just wanted to ask, and you can respond in the chat box, when you hear the term ministry, what is ministry to you? And you can generate your responses. I'll share them with other webinar participants, but in the interim, I'll keep talking. So I came across the definition regarding ministry and one regarding self-care. And it says, in ministry, determining how I serve, the writers take a look at expanding the reader's concept of ministry. Thus, the writer suggests, most of us think of ministry as the work done by pastors, missionaries, Christian conference speakers, or evangelists. We rarely think of work done by bankers, lawyers, engineers, or homemakers as ministry. We want to expand your vision of ministry so that you come to view all you do, regardless of your occupation, as what it is and ought to be. Ministry that glorifies God and influences other people. I have one response regarding ministry, so I'd like to go back. When I asked what is ministry, Sheila McNeil Lee, who's my supervisor at Sibley, says that ministry is serving out of faith in some organized activity or event. And then I have a response from Betty White. It says, ministry is all and everything we do to provide care and support to others in need, including ourselves. And then David Monfort says, ministry is loving God, ourselves, and others. Those three responses are great. So I would like for us to just get the idea that ministry is outward towards others, inwards towards self, regardless of what vocation or occupation we serve in. And so then self-care. What is self-care to you? And you can feel free to share your definitions or understanding in the chat box, and I'll share those after I present the information that I found through research. And it reads, self-care is a broad term that encompasses just about anything you do to be good to yourself. It's about knowing when your resources are running low and stepping back to replenish them rather than letting them all drain away. And that comes from Catherine Hurst in her article entitled, What is Self-Care and Why is it Important? Oh, okay. Marilyn Davis responds regarding self-care. She says, it's a loving, gentle support to self. Colorful definition. Okay, with that being said, we're going to move on to our next slide. There are some objectives for this presentation. Objective number one, we've already taken care of, but the learning objectives include participants will be able to, 1, by the end of this presentation, define ministry and self-care. 2, distinguish the difference between self-care and self-indulgence, and I think that's very important. 3, recognize why self-care is essential. And 4, assess self-care needs and implement appropriate interventions that reflect a healthy work-life balance. And with that being said, that's the goal for this presentation. So your objectives are always the promise of a lesson, saying that when this lesson is over, these are the things that we should be able to do based on the content that's presented. I want to go back to the question I posed, what is self-care? So we have some more explanations that have come in. So I'm going to try to go back. Candace Kelly says, okay, so she responded to the question, what is ministry? Ministry is being present and hospitable as a listening, compassionate supporter, regardless of cultural diversities, etc. Nice. Ruth McIntyre says, ministry is compassionate work alongside of others for what brings life meaning. Nice. And then we have Patricia Johnson addresses the question, what is self-care? And she says, self-care is taking the time to fill the well, to give out of fullness, not emptiness. I like that part of giving out of fullness, not emptiness, because far too often, many of us serving in pastoral ministry, chaplaincy, etc., find ourselves sometimes not giving out of fullness because we haven't taken care of ourselves like we should. David Mumford responds to the self-care question and says, self-care is loving ourselves in ways that are holistic, okay? Betty White responds again. She responds to self-care saying, self-care is being aware of your own spiritual, emotional, and physical needs. Nice. Okay, so we covered our objectives. We've looked at people's definition of ministry, what it is, and self-care. So we're going to go to slide number 6. Why do we avoid self-care? Especially those of us who function in the ministerial role. Why do we avoid self-care? So I put some things out there, and while I share these things aloud, again, in your chat box, if you think of something that I have not shared, please put it in there, and I'll present it to everyone in attendance. One of the reasons I feel that we as people avoid self-care goes with bullet point number 1. We feel that self-care is for everyone else but ourselves. Point number 2, or a possibility, is that we don't know what self-care is or what it should look like for us. as ironic as that may sound, yep, we teach other people self-care, we serve, we nurture, we provide feasible interventions to help them, but when it comes to us, sometimes there's difficulty figuring out, well, what is self-care concerning me? The third bullet point I put out there is we mistake self-indulgence for self-care. And as I did my research for this presentation, I was like, whoa, with the materials I came across. So we'll cover a slide in this presentation where we compare self-care and self-indulgence to get a better understanding of how sometimes we confuse self-care with self-indulgence, but they're not one and the same. And the next bullet point says, our understanding of being an effective servant is rooted in the act of serving others. And I think that is a biggie for many of us. That's where we go wrong to neglect our self-care, because some servants have an idea that I'm a servant, so everything that I do needs to be done in an otherness fashion to and for other people, and in that we end up neglecting ourselves. And then my last reason or possibility as to why we avoid self-care is we are too busy to have fun. With chaplains I've worked with and in circles, one thing that many of us share, especially those of us who have served in the field for a while, is the idea that it is imperative to have fun, to find ways to have fun in order to be viable in this field. And so we have some people who have responded to reasons why we avoid self-care. Let's see. Bonnie Brown says, we fail to schedule time for self-care. On that I would have to say amen. And it's true. We can become so consumed with everything else and everyone else that we fail to make time for self-care. Okay. Moving on to the next slide. Why is self-care essential? When we fail to take care of ourselves or do not really know what self-care is, we might find ourselves in predicaments where we practice a regular pattern of restorative care. Restorative care is what is needed after someone has overworked or overexerted him or herself to the point of burnout because the person did not implement self-care. As a result, this person becomes physically ill, stressed and or depressed, and must be nursed back to health, which is a stable place before this person is able to return to work or other activities. Self-care helps us to avoid the need for restorative care. Some benefits of self-care include better productivity, improved resistance to disease, enhanced self-esteem, increased self-knowledge, more to give, and the ability to assess one's own well-being and implement self-care measurements before becoming depleted and in need of restorative care. So I wanted to explain what burnout is for those who may not know or may have it confused with something else. Burnout is when someone physically or mentally collapses, breaks down because of overworking or stress. I looked at restorative care, and what I found in the health profession, restorative care is often linked to being a way of helping people to rehabilitate themselves. So it's like a term used in the rehabilitation field, but when I was a teacher, I would have periods where, you're going, you're planning, you're teaching, and I would just like bottom out, be it strep throat. One time I had pneumonia, sinusitis, and pleurisy all at the same time, and I had to be like on a 2-week bed rest. So I had to be restored back to my normal health. So then I said restorative care is a term that we can implement in the chaplaincy field or in the ministerial field, because a lot of us will go, and then hit bottom and have to take time to be restored. So in saying that, restorative care is not self-care. If we implement self-care, chances are we will avoid the need to have restorative care. So I have some responses. Let me see. Marilyn Davis says, I believe unconsciously we don't think about self-care, not listening to our bodies. we have the feeling of guilt when we take the time out for self-care. We are in need of sabbatical as often as needed. Yes, in that response, I like how she said, we do not listen to our bodies. I'm a firm believer, and one of my childhood friends is on this webinar, Cyrus Smith, and we talk about self-care often. And so when I told her about this webinar, she's like, I want to participate, Roberta, because you're always giving me tips on self-care. We don't listen to our bodies, you know. My godmom is a retired pastor. She's also on this webinar, the Reverend Dr. Teresa Capers, and she was the person that taught me about the importance of taking naps and just resting. And she's very good about, you know, whatever I'm doing, she'll ask self-care questions, which have helped me to be more conscious of my self-care. And I would also have to give credit to my supervisor, the Reverend Dr. Sheila McNeely, again at Sibley. She does the same thing. So I say all of that to say our bodies also let us know what we need, and we find ourselves in need of restorative care when we push beyond what our bodies are telling us just to do what we feel we need to do, what's on our agenda, or what we want to do, rather than honoring the communication from our bodies. And we'll get into that more later on. So I see that Margaret Coots, who I call Marty, she's a pediatric chaplain in Nashville and one of my good friends. She said that sometimes foregoing self-care is seen as a badge of honor, even among those of us who know better. And Marty, if you would take a moment and unpack that for me, because that's a pretty deep response, and I think that all of us would appreciate you saying more because, wow, self-care as a badge of honor. Okay. And then we have Angelique Mitchell, who has added, I think our lack of ability to engage in self-care has to do with our inner childhood voices. We need to comp grips with those voices such as don't be lazy, or when you work hard, you can accomplish things, etc. So I believe we can we have to undo mental blocks to do it. That's a good point, because perhaps our ideas about self-care stem from what we were taught growing up. The comment like, don't be lazy, or you work hard, you gain, or people will use scripture, Holy Scripture, to support the idea of working, or they'll say the saying like, if a man or woman doesn't work, he or she does not eat. And then a person can get the idea like, I must work in order to be considered important or significant. And nowhere in that can you see self-care. So thinking like that can hamper our ideas about self-care. Deborah Hurd adds, sometimes we feel that we are the only ones able to do the job in ministry, which results in neglecting ourselves. Woo! That's a heavy one. Because I often like to say to people, as sad as it may be, or as hurtful or startling as it may be to hear, the reality is if we were to die today, yep, there may be a memorial, some flowers may be sent, cards, gifts, condolences to your parents or family, none of which you would be able to partake in, but a job description would go in the newspaper for you to be replaced. So in that, we do have to look at, okay, if I die, the world's going to go on, so what can I do to help myself stick around? Self-care. And then I'll read the comment from Marian Anderson. When we work 6 or 7 days a week, then we don't enjoy a Sabbath day, as most people celebrate. I'm sorry, let me reread that. When we work 6 or 7 days a week, then we don't enjoy a Sabbath day as most people celebrate. That one's a heavy one, because some people do work 7 days a week. But even in that, we don't necessarily have to have a whole day to have self-care. I'm going to share something that we have at Sibley Memorial Hospital in D.C. With the new formation of our medical building, they implemented what is called a tranquility room, and they encourage the staff to take a maximum of 15 minutes, but, maybe 5, 10, to go into the room, and there are these areas that are sectioned with a curtain, and they have really comfortable chairs. There's one area with a yoga mat and some, meditational devices. The lights are kept low. There are nature sounds that play, and you can turn that off or keep it on. But the room is in place to help the staff to take a moment for themselves to rejuvenate their souls. We have an innovation hub, and they conducted research to look at feasible ways to help staff recharge themselves or take a moment for themselves throughout their workday. Self-care is something that can happen while we work. I think making intentional time to honor time solely for you is what self-care in the workplace can look like during a workday. And then we'll go to the next slide. I'm going to read what David Mumford shared. David says, our culture prides productivity over being. It does. But at the end of the day, we still have to ask ourselves, who are we to ourselves? While society may say go, 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 we can't go if we have nothing to go on. So we're going to go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you to everyone who shared. I wanted to share a quote from Audre Lorde, who's a poet, essayist, and author. Audre says, self-care is not about self-indulgence. It's about self-preservation. So David, the last comment I shared, he says society prides people on going and, moving and the whole nine. And then we have Audre Lorde coming in to tell us that self-care is not about self-indulgence, but it's about self-preservation. So while society is saying go, 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 it doesn't tell us to take care of ourselves, but somewhere between the going and the burnout, we have to learn to do something different so we can avoid the burnout. So I think that what David says is real, but also what Audre Lorde offers us in her quote is real as well. So Marty has helped us to better understand the badge of honor comment. She says badge of honor and not taking care of ourselves is kind of an overall thing in our culture. It's like we compete to see who can claim the prize of busyness. Wow. Maybe we feel that makes us more important. Yeah. So I guess then the question becomes, wow, I have to think about that one. Yep. There can be a subconscious competitive spirit on busyness, but I don't know. I think I've reached a point in my life where I'm like, some things I just can't do until I take care of me. And so whereas at one point I probably was like, let me do this, thanks to Dr. Capers, I'm quick to be like, let me take a nap because those things will still be there when I wake up from my nap. I'll be recharged and will be more effective at doing whatever it is I think I need to do. But we all have to get to our own place of self-care in our own way and in our own time. But, yes, Marty, thank you for sharing that. On to the next slide. So here we get to look at comparing self-care to self-indulgence. As I conducted the research to look at this, I was like, oh, my goodness. So we're going to look at the column under self-care first, and then we'll look at the self-indulgence column. So under self-care, it says, self-care includes activities that gratify the soul. They strengthen, nourish, replenish, and or develop who we are at the core. These activities help us to center ourselves with feelings of renewal. When we have experienced self-care, our souls utter, while our outer appearance reflects rejuvenation. And this is what I found about self-indulgence. Self-indulgence is when we feel our need for replenishing our soul with activities that distract us, but do not provide us with an internal, external feeling of renewal. Once we complete the activity, we find ourselves feeling just as drained or depleted as we did before the activity or distraction. So at this time, I welcome people to share activities that they engage in for self-care in the chat box, as well as activities that you may have engaged in, which, based on this definition, are labeled as self-indulgence, but maybe you thought it was self-care. So I would say for me, like, something I didn't realize would be considered self-indulgence that I was mistaken for self-care is to say, hey, let me go out and buy this item because I deserve it. You know, it'll make me feel good. And yep, buying whatever the item was made me feel good. I'm like, yes, I earned it. But if I was tired before I purchased the item, guess what? I was still tired after I purchased the item. So that wasn't self-care. It was self-indulgence, a reward, but it had nothing to do with rejuvenating my soul or replenishing my energy. So again, you can share some of your self-care tactics in the chat box or your self-indulgence implementations in the chat box as well. So we're going to go ahead and go on while you're sharing. Oh, some people have already shared. So for self-care, okay, let me see. We have let me see. Okay, thank you, Mr. Sullivan. I think it's important to include not just my valuable content, but also contributions from the group, because that's why we're in the webinar, to share in what we're doing. Because I think we all have something that we can add to this presentation, or not, but to garner something. So yes, I will share, continue to share my valuable comment, as well as infusing strategies and techniques used by others, because I can't say that I've done everything, and I learn from people as well, and I hope that you are too. For self-care, Bonnie Brown puts that she reads, music, listening to music. I love music a lot. I could actually live with a radio and no TV because I find music to be therapeutic. I know that there are a number of hospice agencies that infuse music therapy into their care for patients, and that's important because a lot of healing can come through music. Betty White suggests art, watch sports, spa days, rituals, pampering, declare a day of nothing. There are two things that I would say three things that I do as a form of self-care. I ensure that I get regular manicures, pedicures, and eyebrow arches. But once I started with hospice and found how I was holding the tension in my shoulders, I started out with going to visit a masseuse, to a massage parlor. I have a masseuse whenever I felt tension, which was becoming more like restorative care than self-care. And then because I know the hospice field, death is our life. It's not a matter of if I will encounter death. Death is going to come. So what do I do to make sure that I am cared for so that I can care for the people entrusted to me? I implement interventions. So I do see my masseuse on a regular basis, whether I'm feeling tense or stressed or overwhelmed or not, as a form of self-care for me. Some other people talked about being in nature, meditation, playing the flute, traveling, and lots of laughter. I agree with, I'm not the best at traveling, so that's a growing edge for me. And one of my colleagues suggested that she takes trips, and when she returns from her trip, she's planning her next trip. And I thought, oh, wow, that's a good strategy for self-care that I never thought of. So this is why working in a group and talking helps, because it exposes us to possibilities. And it is, for me, helpful to think of new ways to implement self-care. One major place where I feel that my soul gets restored is when I go to the beach. I love the beach. There's something about the water, the sunshine, the breeze, if there's a breeze, that rejuvenates my soul. So with that being said, we're going to move on to the next slide. What exactly is self-care? And you all have suggested some of the things that you do for self-care. So here we're going to look at what exactly is self-care. It is the intentional practice of taking an active role in protecting one's own well-being and happiness. Effective self-care includes setting boundaries which help one attain autonomy over how he or she utilizes his or her time. It helps one to have balance in life. It calls for one to assess his or her well-being on a regular basis. It is the act of infusing time for fun into one's already busy workload. And it is the ammunition which creates the spark for us to complete all the tasks assigned to us. It gives us permission to enjoy life as we live. And it reminds us that fun is not sanctioned to childhood, but appropriate at every age level. Those are some of the reasons, some of the most, to me, important reasons why self-care is, why it's important and what it is. Because we can wrestle with, well, what exactly is self-care? Why is it important? And the reasons listed here help us to understand what it is exactly. It's taking time. It's not ignoring the fact that our schedules are busy, but being intentional with our time to make sure that we include self-care. It's a way of helping us to have balance in life. We can't be all work, all busyness, because if you're looking at a scale and you have all your weight on the left side because that's your busy side, your right side self-care, and there's nothing on it, the scale is imbalanced. It's not balanced out. So then you have to say, hey, I need to spend time on infusing interventions of self-care so that I have balance in my life. And when we don't, we know it because we end up sick, we end up stressed, and we become bitter. Even though those of us serving in ministry, we feel that we're called by a higher power. Even in that, when we fail to take care of ourselves, we'll find ourselves feeling bitter. All right. Moving on to the next slide. Just a little quote and a beautiful image. We offer God the gift of our time as we focus on worship instead of work and self-care instead of self-importance. And that comes from a book entitled Open-Hearted Ministry, Play as Key to Pastoral Leaders by one of my seminary professors, Dr. Michael Koppel. I think reframing, which is a technique that a lot of chaplains use when creating their care plans, it may be an intervention depending on your assessment of a patient or a family, helping them to reframe how they view their experience. So we can use that tactic of reframing when we look at our work and view it as worship instead of work. I use reframing as a cycling instructor, so, I like to say to the students who take my class, okay, cycling is recess you gave up to become adults. So we're here to reclaim our recess. Remember the feeling you had when your teacher said it's recess time and the door was open to go outside, you just ran out screaming. That's how I want your inner self to feel when you enter this room and get on your bike. This is not detention. You can scream. If you want to clap, you're able to clap. You're here to have fun. There is no sin. And I use the word sin and have fun and exercise. And they will laugh or they will smile. I said for these 45 minutes, your life is all about you. So just refocusing reframing exercise, because sometimes when we hear the word exercise, it sounds like another task or, oh, my gosh, another thing to do. Oh, I know research says that you gain energy from exercise, constantly gain energy from doing something that's going to conserve energy. We talk ourselves out of it, but I think if we take the time to reframe or to look at it in a different light, it will help us. It helps me. And so, yes, in self-care, reframing self-care as self-importance. So now our work has become worship, and our self-care has become self-importance. Moving on to the next slide. Some reasons. So I wanted to infuse some research on what happens or can happen as a result of self-care. Especially in ministry, I know some people have different ideas about people who say, hey, I'm in the ministry, because we tend to view it, and especially depending on our traditions, as a commitment for life. God has called us to this. This is what we're doing. And so there's nothing we can do. And I view this that way helpful for some people. So looking at some reasons clergy walk away from ministry, and based on the research, I just grouped some of the things together. There were a few sources I used, and some of them had overlapped issues, and so the issues that overlapped are bold and they're starred. One and one versus the other is in regular print. So some of the reasons clergy walk away from ministry include being overworked, feeling inadequate, underpaid, they felt unprepared, they felt like failures, suffering from depression, family neglect, loneliness, burnout, conflict in the church or whatever field in which they served, change in calling, feeling called to something different, their physical health challenges, and then I put depression in bold. So because some people suffer from depression, medically treated, some people had bouts with experiencing depression. So I wanted to look at, in particular, loneliness, burnout, and depression, and define them so that we can have an understanding as we move forward. Loneliness may cause one to feel drained, distracted, isolated, and or empty. Burnout is when someone physically or mentally collapses, breaks down because of overworking or stress. And depression may look like sadness, extreme tiredness, feelings of hopelessness, worthlessness. It may result in a person not eating or not eating healthy foods. It may be characterized by periods of crying and or suicidal or homicidal thoughts. I'll say for me, I remember when I was training at MedStar, Georgetown University Hospital, it seemed like out of nowhere I encountered a severe period of loneliness. Like it didn't matter how many people I was around or what I did in terms of church, meditation. I was even exercising at the time. I just went through a period of loneliness. And I remember working with my supervisor, Chaplain Don Clem, who's still over at Georgetown, in my individual sessions on the loneliness piece. And I remember him saying to me in one of our sessions that, Roberta, I believe that this experience will help you in your ministry as you move forward. And I believe it has, but it also recalled me to think back on a time when I was a teacher and I taught first grade, and I had a young lady from another country, straight A student, who sometimes would break out crying, and she would just utter the words, "Miss White, I feel so lonely." And at that time, I couldn't understand what she was saying because I didn't have my own experience with loneliness. But then fast forwarding into my residency, that season of loneliness I went through, it came back to me later, like now I know what that young lady was talking about when she talked about loneliness. It was like a place that no one could rescue me from, a place that I guess if I had to try to give a visual image of what it felt like being in a desert with no water and no person in sight, although I worked amongst people every day as a resident chaplain, it was not a comfortable place to be. I did a lot of praying, a lot of journaling, a lot of crying, but it was one of those seasons. And in life, a lot of times, many of us, or some of us, go through seasons that we don't understand at that time, but it's a place or something we have to go through in order to get to wherever the Creator is leading us to. But the good thing is that it helps when we have people to help us through those things. So going on back to clergy and walking away from ministry. Moving on to our next slide. Research findings which support the need for self-care. So I looked at a few sources, and from those sources I pulled out some reasons why the Association of Professional Chaplains and other professional associations that credential chaplains or clergy can make a case as to why we need to be more intentional about teaching on self-care. APCE supervisors can be intentional as they train their interns and their residents, being even more intentional, because I honestly feel that when I was an intern, a chaplain intern, Reverend Sheila McNeil-Lee, who's my supervisor now, was also my clinical pastoral education supervisor. I think she did a great job with helping me to understand why self-care was important, what it is, and why it's important. But as we move forward, even supervisors in the field of professional chaplaincy for themselves and their staff need to be more intentional in ensuring that self-care is implemented amidst the demands of the job. So research findings which support the need for self-care. According to xpastor.com in 2015, the question was, do you consider yourself lonely? 63% of the participants said yes. 37% said no. The next question, would you consider yourself having experienced burnout? 77% of the clergy who responded to that question said yes, that they had experienced burnout, while 23% said no. Under the research conducted by Dr. Richard Creaser's Statistics on Pastors 2016 update, 54% of pastors felt overworked, 43% felt overstressed, 28% felt spiritually undernourished, and 9% felt burnt out. 18% said that they had more work. They worked more, than 70 hours a week amidst unreasonable challenges. When you consider what was shared on the previous slide in terms of reasons that clergy walk away, you look at statistics. These are just a few, and we do need to conduct more research on self-care measures and emotional well-being of clergy, especially chaplains. Like clergy, research is there. Chaplains, we need to begin to conduct our own research findings on self-care or the lack thereof and its impact on our function as professional chaplains or people providing care in settings beyond the walls of churches or synagogues or other religious sanctions. Moving on to the next section, how different religions approach self-care. I thought that this would be good. I know there are many more religions in the world, United States, the whole nine, but I just picked the Jewish community, Christianity, and the Muslim community to look at in terms of self-care. So Cantor Susan Carroll suggests in her article entitled Self-Care is Not Selfish, 7 examples of being. 1, take time for thinking, and these are some ways of implementing self-care in the Jewish community, which could be used in all communities. 2, most of life exists in the gray, is what she said. 3, look for God within the music, and God looks for us inside the rest, letting the mind and heart be clear. 4, nightly recap. 5, give it time. 8, gratitude is most important for me in being present. And 7, the unexpected occurs. As I go into Christianity, you will notice colors used on the screen. So where there were similarities of interventions, the colors are the same. So under the Jewish column, you'll see take time for thinking. And under the Muslim column, there's the same color, meditation and reflection. Night recap, gratitude is most important for me and being present. Those are all similar things which provide care for the mind. So going under the Christianity column, this block helps to clarify the Christian perspective of self-care using Jesus as a model for self-care. 1, we are called to be stewards. Self-care is all about being good stewards of our bodies, minds, and souls. The second thing they suggest, we can't give what we don't have. 3, Jesus retreated from others to rest or pray, and then they cite Scripture. And 4, Jesus took time to sleep, and they cite another Scripture. And then you look under the Muslim column, it says Muslims have gleaned 10 practical self-care tips from the Quran and Sunnah. 1 is meditation and reflection. 2, giving back. 3, pray salah. 4, portion control. 5, call out to God. 6, avoid regrets. 7, take care of your body. 8, count your blessings. 9, keep good company. And 10, go easy on yourself. So I looked at these things, and I'm like, okay, there are some commonalities in terms of self-care approaches between the 3 religions. I think that the taking care of your body, under the Muslim column, and Jesus took naps, or we are called to be good stewards. Under the Christianity column, those are they're similar, stated differently, and probably approached differently, but they help us to get an idea or a conceptualization of what caring for the body can look like. Under the Jewish column and the Muslim column, going back, you have take time for thinking, meditation, and reflection. I think meditation, even for me as a Christian, is important because it helps me to center my soul. Something that I do every morning, I have been disciplined in doing in the mornings before my feet hit the floor, is reading the Our Daily Bread, because I get it on my email. It comes through my email account. I can read the meditation for the day, click on the link for the scripture that goes along with the meditation, in addition to reading. There are 3 scriptures that I read in addition to that every day, which helps to fortify my soul and center me on knowing that God's got control of my day. Those scriptures help to calm any anxiety that might try to find its way into my day before I step out the door to care for other souls. I like how the mentioning of gratitude was brought up. I don't think that many of us let me not say many, let me not quantify it. I think sometimes gratitude, like self-care, can be overlooked in terms of how therapeutic it can be for us as a person. Extending gratitude to people, taking the time to just observe and give voice to something that someone does that makes us feel good will not only make them feel good, but will also make us feel good, and that is a measure of self-care. Under the Jewish column and the Muslim column, under the Jewish column they say give it time, and the Muslim column say go easy on yourself. And this leads me to think back to the participant who talked about the demands that society puts on us. When we look at the demands on our lives, a lot of times we just think go, go, go. But there are some experiences that we have in this life for which we have to give them time. And when I say that, I'll use conflict as an example. Wherever you have people, you're going to have conflict. On your job, in your church, in your synagogue, in your temple, wherever you're worshiping, at the gym, there's going to be tension. There can be tension, there can be conflict, because there are people. But the issue is not the conflict, but how we choose to work through it. I know Holy Scripture will say, do not let the sun go down on your wrath, so sometimes that can be internalized to mean, oh, I have to bring resolution to the situation right away. I need to address it. But what life has shown me is that some things, you pray about it and you have to let sit. And what I've found in terms of conflict and giving it time, things will work themselves out. And I'm not saying that to say you avoid addressing it, you just act like it never happened. No, somehow the situation will lead you and the person or the people to the same place at the same time where the issue will come up and you're able to address it and walk away with a greater peace. So in other words, I don't ever feel the need to just address every conflict in the moment, because sometimes we need to let anger or disagreement have its moment. But the goal should always be to seek peace. So when I saw give it time, go easy on yourself, I'm like, okay, so that gives me permission to not feel that I have to resolve every situation in the time period in which it takes place. All right, moving on to our next slide. Ten successful ways that people spend their time after work. So I'm going to just ask a question because I've done a lot of talking and haven't thrown any questions out there, but you can put this in the chat box. What are some ways that you spend your time after work? And I mean, if you sleep after work, every time you get off work, that's okay to put in there, but hopefully this webinar will help us all to consider different ways we can spend our time after work. So the first column says workout. So let me just share a little bit about Dr. Susan Gill. She suggests in her article that how we spend our time outside of work, ministry, what we do during the day, the evening hours, or the weekends, and when we're on vacation, can have a big impact on our service in ministry. If our goal is to support others, we must be intentional with how we spend our time. We cannot afford to be the teacher who does not practice what he or she teaches. Our experiences help us to authentically convey to our congregation, patients, their family, and or our family, in addition to others, ways to care for self. She suggests working out or to work out. And she broke that down to define it as following a consistent fitness regimen that will boost your creativity, confidence, and resilience, both at work and in your personal life. Moving your body is good for your career. If you want to enhance your productivity during work hours, spend a little time of your free time moving your body. So sometimes, I know for me, exercise equipment in a gym is just exercise equipment in a gym. I'm not interested. I'm a social person, so I enjoy activities where I can be with other people. So I don't only teach a cycling class. I also, as my bio says, I go boxing, which after this webinar, I will be heading to my boxing class. I like to dance, and so when I find a good dance instructor in terms of Zumba, I'm all there. It gives me a chance to scream. I'm a former high school cheerleader. I love opportunities to scream. It gives me a chance to just, take my energy and place it somewhere else. I'm not thinking about my next care plan. I'm not thinking about my next staff meeting. I'm not sitting there mourning, oh gosh, I have this patient who's got a death pending. For the moments I'm in my class, I'm in my class. Like when you're with your parishioners or your patients or your family or staff members, being present in the moment. So exercise allows us the opportunity to be present in the moment. She suggests the next column, seek inspiration and fresh experiences. I'm going to just speed this up a little, and I'm not going to read everything behind every column. because I want to try to get through all our slides. She talks about building authentic relationships. So I do want to speak on that because a lot of time is given to social media. So she says, living in an age of Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we must be intentional in arranging face-to-face encounters. These encounters should welcome exploration of things that matter to us but are not work-related, such as population fluctuation, new trends taking place in one person's life, and or seeking the input of others whom you respect on an issue that matters to you. I believe such interaction supports the Holy Bible's teachings related to bearing one another's burdens or sticking closer together than a brother or a sister. Such relationships also open the doors to real accountability and gives us opportunities to practice unconditional love. Another one that I think is important that she lists is saying no. Why do sometimes we feel we must always say yes? You know, if a supervisor comes and says, would you want to pick up this shift on the weekend? And we know that we're feeling burnt out, but you're like, oh, the supervisor asked. So, yes, I want to pick it up, but do you really want to pick it up? Or are you picking it up because you feel you're obligated to pick it up, or you have to pick it up because you don't want your colleagues to suffer? Why? What would be wrong with saying no? I tell people all the time, no is a complete sentence all by itself. It doesn't need anything after it, and it doesn't need anything before it. You know, sometimes we feel like, oh, no, I can't do it actually because I have a football game with my 5-year-old. I need to get my 12-year-old to the hair salon. No. I'm sorry, unfortunately, I can't. Or you may want to give an explanation, but I think in saying no, some of us have to learn to not feel guilty for saying no. She also suggests spending time in nature, unplugging, getting the most out of evening routines, taking real vacations, taking classes, and investing in self, and to de-stress and take care of self. I did want to touch on unplugging and taking real vacations, so I'll do that quickly. To unplug means no devices, no Wi-Fi, no emails, no social media. In an article I read this summer in Essence Magazine, the July-August 2018 edition, the article entitled Happy Talk, Women Ages 23 through 50 Share Simple Acts That Brought Them Joy. One of those acts was laying low. Aisha Elliott, a 36-year-old, says she talked about how a few years ago she began to turn her phone off while attending Sunday worship. Now, some years later, she keeps her phone off the entire day. Small steps. So after reading this article, I personally set an alarm on my cell phone at midnight on Sunday, and it tells me to get off Facebook. While I'm not always successful, I'm working to get better because it is freeing to not be consumed with reading the news feed or checking to see how someone reacted to my post. Social media can be taxing. Think of what changes you would like to make in order to unplug. And then I wanted to speak to her suggestion on taking real vacations. Step outside your norm. Staycations usually do not feel like real vacations. To get outside of one's living environment breeds the potential for one to not focus on all that needs to be done in the living environment. No matter what I claim I'm going to do during a staycation, such as rest, sleep in, watch TV, I always end up filing papers or cleaning a room, ironing, doing work. So staycations for me always turn into workations. And if you're that type of person who says, okay, I'm taking a day off to stay home and relax, and then you're like, you know what, I have laundry that I need to put away, and you find yourself putting it away, are you really taking care of yourself with that day off? Just some thoughts. Next, Ways of implementing self-care. Our next slide. What will you do to implement self-care? And some people have shared what they do to implement self-care. Healthy eating and connecting with their spouse and family. That comes from Candace Kelly. Ruth McIntyre says, loving my husband and pets, cooking healthy foods, and spending moments alone, sometimes in nature. So we've covered quite a bit up to this point. We've looked at what self-care is. We've looked at self-care in comparison to self-indulgence. We've looked at ways that 3 religious traditions, some things that they do for self-care. We looked at the Jewish community, the Christian community, and the Muslim community. We've also examined some things that people do in the evening times or the evening or weekend times when they're outside of work. So what are some things that we may do differently as a result of what we've shared in this presentation or what has been shared? And you can share that under chat. Someone put playing with my 4-year-old granddaughter. Yeah, that's a form of self-care. It's otherness. You're focusing on others, but yet it's gratifying to your soul. So I want to go on to the next slide, and you can put things up while I continue to read. Self-care, tools for assessing and implementing self-care. We must have a method by which to assess how we are and where we are internally, emotionally. So the first bullet point says, pay attention to your mood when you feel vibrant and when you feel burnt out or heading towards feeling burnt out. And I would say for me, I don't feel the same when I'm vibrant versus when I'm feeling overwhelmed. There's a different feeling internally. If I'm heading to feeling burnt out, I'll notice that my attitude may get shorter. I find that as I get older, it's easy for me to forget things, and I'm just like, oh my God, I found myself earlier in this year, I didn't realize I was getting to a point of feeling burnt out, but I was because I just began forgetting things. So then I started trying to normalize it by saying, well, maybe I'm going through something, or could I be experiencing early onset dementia? I had a talk with one of my parishioners at church who's a retired social worker, and as I shared with her how I was feeling and what was going on, she says, oh, Roberta, it sounds like you may be overwhelmed. You should take some time for yourself, and you may even want to consider, she's like, I don't know if you have access to an employee assistance program, EAP, which many people on jobs do. You may want to talk to a counselor so you can process how you're feeling and what you're going through. So I talked to 2 of my good college friends who live in South Carolina, and I scheduled a trip to go to South Carolina. And I remember when I got there, I had this terrible pain in my right shoulder. One of my sorority sisters took me to the beach, and I lied to you not. I got on that sand, saw the sun above the water. The pain left my shoulder. My arm went straight in the air. I was like, oh, my God, this is what I needed. And when I came back to D.C. to work, I felt rejuvenated. And all I could say to myself was, okay, be more intentional in your implementation of self-care so that you don't have to get to a point of near burnout. Be more cognizant of what's going on inside of you. And so the second bullet point says, recognize what goes on inside and outside of you when you are approaching the burnout stage. Begin to implement interventions, the next bullet point, from your self-care list to help you avoid burnout. And then implementing self-care. Set boundaries. Say no. And I think I'm very good at, so sometimes my boundaries bend. I'll be like, oh, okay, I'll make this one exception. And then one exception sometimes becomes 2 exceptions. And I'm like, wait a minute. But I think I'm a scholar at saying no. I think my supervisor, Sheila, would say, yeah, Roberta knows how to say no. I think I'm very good at saying no, but it's in saying no to commitments that sometimes I'll find myself taking on other tasks. So I have to learn how to not take on other tasks if I'm saying no to commitments, creating a balance. The next bullet point under implement self-care, form circles of accountability, which may include colleagues, friends, and family. And I think I do a good job of that. Like I've mentioned, my supervisor, my childhood friend Shira, my godmom, Dr. Capers. I have people I can talk to about what's going on in my life, people who I can laugh with, cry with, who will intercede for me, which is always needed. Under implementing self-care, scheduling vacations. I find that a lot of my friends are way better at that than me, so that's a growing edge for me. Incorporate some form of physical activity into your daily routine at least 2 to 3 times a week. That part I have down. The next bullet point, get adequate rest. I've gotten better at that. And then the last one, eat a diet packed with vegetables, fruits, nuts, and water, according to what is healthy for you if you have a medical condition. Always follow your doctor's orders. Let's see. Someone suggests making sure that we always attend all of our doctor's appointments. Yes. So before we head into our question and answer session, and I want to thank you all for being so attentive and contributing, I want to share an activity that I was able to present at the Pediatric Chaplaincy Institute I attended some years ago, where I met Marty Coots, pediatric chaplain. It's what I call a 411 support list. So on this slide it says, it is always better to call out for help, dialing 411, rather than to call out because of any emergency, dialing 911. Our friends and colleagues serve a specific, unique purpose in our lives. While one friend may be a riot, easy to laugh with, that friend may not be the best person to share confidential matters with. You must know the character of the people within your circle of friends and colleagues. With that in mind, create a list with some of the following categories or ones you choose. So if you were to create a list, you might say, okay, I know the kinds of things, or the things, that I go through in life. It helps when I have someone that I can share good times with, someone that I can discuss serious matters with. Oh my gosh, I know me, Roberta Sansaray White, I love to laugh. I look and welcome opportunities to laugh. So I need to have a column for laughter. I know I need a confidant because sometimes I need to clear my soul of, the things that I've experienced or that I think I will experience. I need people to intercede for me in prayer. I need someone or some people to hold me accountable. I need a friend that's going to be honest, keep it real with me, be candid. Sometimes I cry. In addition to laughing, I think I have a good balance. I laugh a lot and I cry a lot. So I may just want to call one of my friends to have them listen to me while I cry. I'm not looking for them to solve my problem. I just need to cleanse my soul in the company of somebody I know who cares about me. So cry or complain. I'm not big on complaining, but some people are, and that's fine if it helps you to feel better. I need someone who's compassionate in my circle and reassuring. So then if you create categories or whatever your categories are, beneath the categories you place on your list, you would put the name of the person and the best way to reach him or her. And you would want to keep this list handy, place a copy in your work bag, or keep it in your office drawer, your nightstand, or in your purse or wherever, and use it often to help you avoid burnout and depression. So I created a list of a slide of what a 411 support list might look like. Good times, this person's name, phone number, email address. For serious matters, I would call Sister Joyce, or I would email her. Intercessory prayer, I would reach out to Chaplain L. To be held accountable, to have someone to remind me of professional ethics as a chaplain, or the expectation in my role as a hospice chaplain. I would call this person, or I know that sometimes I might be hard on myself, or I might question my decisions or the method of my practice. I can call this person for reassurance or for a compassionate response. Okay, so those are some techniques. I mean, I think this is a technique that can be helpful, and you may not need to write out a list. Maybe visually or in your mind, you already know who you call for what. I know that I do. I know who I'll go to for good times, and I thank God I have a number of people for good times. I know who I go to for intercessory prayer. I know who I can go to who's going to be honest with me about myself, even if it can be painful, but it's going to be beneficial later. So just knowing who's in your circle, because I'm a firm believer that everyone is in our circle for a purpose. Every person has a purpose. Allow them to function in that purpose and help you to take care of yourself. So with that being said, at this time, I'm going to bring Nick back in, and we'll have our questions and feedback.
Thank you. At this time, we'll begin the question and answer session. Please type your question into the Q&A area at the lower left side of your screen, and please hold for a moment while our system compiles those responses. Again, if you have any questions at all, please submit those in the Q&A box in the bottom left-hand side of your screen.
Or if there's any feedback.
All right, our first question comes from Marilyn Davis. How long or often should one take a sabbatical?
How long or often should someone take a sabbatical? I would have to say, Marilyn, that is very subjective. I can't prescribe an amount of time because I think that person would have to assess their situation and what they need. So I want to link that over to like self-care, implementing self-care into your workday, and then being intentional in having scheduled self-care activities in your life. This is where a person's assessment of their feelings, what's going on the inside, how it's impacting who they are and what they do, need to all come in play to help them to determine about how long do I need. One of my friends recently took a sabbatical. She wanted to take a sabbatical of a month. She works in an organization where there are two people that should work in her role, but she's been the only person working in that role for like almost 3 years, and so she reached the point of feeling overwhelmed and burnt out. She was approved for 2 weeks and felt like, okay, this is a starting point, but if I could have it my way, I think I need 30 days. Now, someone who doesn't know or didn't know her dynamics, I think 30 days is asking a bit much, or 2 weeks, she could just use a week. But no one can really tell you what you need but you. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Victor, we appreciate the distinction between self-care and self-indulgence.
Thank you, Victor. Excuse me, my pleasure.
And then Deborah, you covered everything from A to Z with a clear understanding. That's good.
Hey, Deborah, thank you.
And Candace says, thank you so much for this valuable information. Please tell me how you end your day and not take your weighty day home.
Woohoo! All right, Candace. I was like, yes, thanks for the compliment. And then it's like, oh, here comes the question. How do I not take my weighty day home? Candace, this may sound cruel. I just have to leave things where they are. You know, I think I've developed over time, you know, going back and forth with overwhelming myself, having to implement restorative care for myself. I had to implement a way of letting go. You know, I've heard it said in my tradition and in my house code, you let go, you let God. Turning things over, and this leads me back to a patient I had during my residency who taught me from, being an alcoholic and going to AA, the patience that I learned to turn my life over to God every night in prayer. And then in the morning, that's when the patient felt that the patient was able to pick the patient's life back up. Praying, saying, God, I pray that you will cover everyone, that you will take care of everything, and I trust that what is needed will be provided. So then I can free myself from the responsibility of feeling that I have to do those things. My supervisor, Sheila, to chime in, over years of serving at the hospital, I now have a practice. When I walk in, I grab my jacket, I get my lotion and my cocoa butter lip balm, and I go straight to the altar. And, Sheila, in the beginning, she, I don't think she was aware of my practice, so she might come in and say, Roberta, I need to talk to you. And I would say, well, can you give me a moment, and go to the altar. And I open with a prayer for a prayer of gratitude to God for allowing me to make it to the hospital safely and carrying me through my day with my patients and families in hospice. And then I pray for all hospitalized people and the people who serve them in the hospital setting. And I ask God to give me the strength to be and to do. And I'll be honest, I also pray that nobody dies and no one needs me on my shift in any dire way. Because, that I'm just an honest person with God, but I invite God in to give me help and give me strength and help me to recognize either I'm planting or I'm watering, like Paul and Apollos, but it's God who handles everything, not me.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Patricia. Sometimes it feels like all of our vacations are centered around others, aging parents, children with needs, etc. Most of my PTO is used up this way. Any suggestions for a real vacation without jeopardizing family relationships and needs?
Patricia, that is a great question. I'm going to say this. We can't please everyone, and we die trying. And I think that says a lot. You have the right to set boundaries. You're not Superwoman, Wonder Woman. You're not God. You have to take time for yourself. The reality is your parents are going to age. That's nothing you can stop. We're chaplains. We're clergy. So we believe in a higher power. We have to allow that higher power to operate and not feel the need to actually be the higher power. We have leave. I tell the staff at hospice all the time, you work, you earn your leave, use your leave. If you can't do an extended vacation of like a week because you feel like someone may get sick, I have to be here, do a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday getaway. It doesn't have to be extensive if you can afford a hotel or if you have a good friend and you can go to their place and rest and they understand and support you because of what you do. You owe that to yourself. And yes, things are going to continue to happen because this is life, but try to find a way not to stay in that circle of caring for other people, using my time for other people, and not making time for yourself.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Stephanie. Do you have a spiritual director? I found that having one has been a great resource for me.
I wouldn't say that I have a spiritual director, but I definitely utilize check-in points to sit with the counselor to review or go over whenever I'm feeling myself coming upon some heaviness or overwhelming feelings as I serve as a chaplain or even as a person. So I do believe in implementing self-care through psychological support. But a spiritual advisor, that's a good suggestion as well. Thank you.
Thanks. And we've got a few more comments here. Marilyn, thank you for all the helpful self-care information and suggestions. And then Joriafa, great job. Well done. Okay. Great job. Well done. Thank you. And then Ruth says, I have found working as a chaplain for 9 years, I found that my self-care routine has needed to change. Have you experienced the same need for your self-care routine?
One thing for me, Ruth, I tried to keep it dynamic, not static. And so that's one of the reasons I found great pleasure in working on this webinar. I wouldn't advise anyone to keep the same routine of self-care in place. Just as our days are dynamic, our lives are dynamic. I don't know anyone in this profession who's getting younger. We're getting older. Our needs change. But the reality of self-care, I believe, as long as we're breathing, will always be there. So we do need to find innovative ways. There was one time where we had this excellent Zumba instructor, and then he left, and I found myself mourning him. And all I could hear was God asking, like, how long will you mourn this instructor? Like, your life has to go on. So then I had to step out there and try something new, and that's when some of my friends who take cycling, my cycling class, were like, hey, you should take boxing. So then I took boxing. That boxing instructor teaches total body on Friday. So I was like, I don't want to spend a Friday evening in nobody's exercise class, but my body's like, I could use this. I need this. And I'm like, you know what? That would give me a chance to scream and exercise and put my mind somewhere else. So I made the sacrifice. So I would have to say yes, Ruth. At times I do experience the need to change, and so I guess I never looked at it like that because I try to change as my body commands the need for something different. And so I think that is good. It's a good idea to do that.
Thank you. And then Patricia says, I love your suggestion about carrying a 411 support list for people and contact information.
Thank you, Patricia. My pleasure.
And then our final question at this time, 5-day Spiritual Academy events are held throughout the country, sponsored by the United Methodist denomination, but open to all. Great place to go for spiritual rejuvenation with lots of silent time.
Thank you for sharing that. We need to make that known. Would you read that again, Nick, so that if people aren't able to see this, they could hear that?
The 5-day Spiritual Academy events held throughout the country, sponsored by the United Methodist denomination, but open to everyone. A great place to go for spiritual rejuvenation and lots of silent time.
Excellent. I do believe I've received some things on Facebook about silent retreats, but they're usually like, it seems like they're centered around yoga, and I know everyone's not into yoga, so I'm not sure how people will respond to that, but I like the 5-day Spiritual Academy. And, okay, very good. Stephanie, I want to ask her a question. Does the resort or the facility, Scarrett Bennett in Nashville, still host different retreats? And she may respond at some point. Okay. Nick?
Well, we have no additional questions or comments at this time.
Okay. I would just like,
Stephanie did just respond, not sure those academies are usually at monasteries.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Yes, I'll turn it back over to you for any closing remarks.
All right, thank you. I would like to first and foremost say thank you to everyone for taking time out of your day to participate in this webinar on self-care. I hope that it has been helpful to you in some way, shape, or form, that you will utilize the information to help you to care for yourself first and then others. And I pray that you will join the Association of Professional Chaplains for other helpful webinars, because they do host many throughout the year. And I would like to leave us with this benediction: Breathe on me, breath of God, by Edwin Hatch. Breathe on me, breath of God, fill me with life anew, that I may love what thou dost love and do what thou wouldst do. Breathe on me, breath of God, until my heart is pure, until with thee I will one will to do or to endure. Breathe on me, breath of God, till I am wholly thine, till all this earthly part of me glows with thy fire divine. Breathe on me, breath of God, so shall I never die. to live with thee the perfect life of thine eternity. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, everyone at the Association of Professional Chaplains. May you all have a blessed day.
And thank you all for your attention. This concludes today's presentation. All participants may now disconnect.